Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Safety First and AI second webinar. Today's session should last around 45 minutes. There's still a fair few people joining the call, but we'll just make a start. You should all have access to the Q&A aspect of the webinar in Teams, either that or the chat. So please, at any time, if you've got any questions, just slot them into the Q&A. And when I finish, I will read through those. So hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I'm just going to get started now. So what I would like to do is not begin with technology. I want to begin with people. As some of you may know, in December 2020, at the Avonmouth Wastewater Treatment Works near Bristol, 4 people were killed in an explosion. And these 4 were part of a work party who were working on top of a silo that stored biosolids, which is a byproduct of sewage treatment. And a cloud of methane gas built up, and it was unfortunately ignited. Among those 4 killed was a 16-year-old apprentice who was working on his very first job. There was a grandfather who'd worked in the industry for decades, and there were 2 other workers who were sadly killed, and reports are that one of them was actually thrown more than 100 metres by the explosion and found in a nearby lagoon on the site. So a truly terrible way to lose your life, and an entirely preventable way to lose your life. And what makes this even harder is that although overall the record of the site was excellent, there were issues that had been flagged several years earlier, as far back as 2014 and 15. Over 6 years before the incident, there was highlighted risks of gas accumulation and inadequate site safety for jobs such as the one that was being done. Yet 6 years later, those warnings sadly weren't enough to stop that tragedy. And when I think about process safety incidents like this, yes, there's highly technical aspects to all of these, but I can't help put myself in the family shoes of the loved ones who were lost. I remember my brother when he was 16 starting an apprenticeship and going off for his first day of work, and my children's grandparents bring so much joy to our family and to themselves, and to imagine those lives cut short, not by misfortune, but by clear failings in safety, is something that I, and I'm sure a lot of you, will struggle to process. And I simply couldn't imagine losing my loved ones to an entirely preventable accident like this. And unfortunately, the risks of these things happening isn't static, it's incredibly dynamic, and in many places it's either rising or already high. You may have heard of the bathtub curve of risk, which really talks about when in high hazard industries, when assets and ways of working are brand new, risks are high because there's teething problems, commissioning issues, and all that sort of thing. But also when assets are very old, near the end, or beyond their original design life, equipment's degraded, things are starting to fail, and risk creeps up over time. And this life cycle of a high hazard asset looks a little bit like a bathtub. And right now, across many industries worldwide, especially here in the UK, we've got a lot of both, lots of the extremities. We've got lots of brand new infrastructure being created, but equally we've got lots of end of life assets as well. And what that means for us is it means that the risks are very high. The risks of a major accident are higher than they might be at other times. I missed a slide there. So, but on top of this, we face a people problem. So across UK industry, particularly in the energy sector, there's a huge struggle to hold on to experienced staff, but also to bring in new staff. I've cited these before. There's other surveys that have shown that the Gen Z, the TikTok generation, fewer than 1 in 5 of them find careers in industries such as oil and gas desirable. Recent piece of work by the Energy and Utility Skills Partnership estimates that by 2030, which isn't very far away, we'll need an additional 300,000 skilled workers. And National Grid projects that that could be as high as 400,000 by 2050. Yeah, look at industries that are up and coming, like the renewables industry, and over 80% of renewables employer already say that they're struggling to recruit. And my final fact on this is that 3/4 of UK employers are reporting that they're struggling to fill technical roles. So that pipeline of talent to manage this risk simply isn't there. And so comes along artificial intelligence, and it sounds like it must be the perfect answer. And if you read the headlines only, you would believe it. I'm told I'm soon going to have an army of agents that are working for me overnight while I'm in my bed fast asleep. And we hear that entire industries are going to be overhauled overnight. And as many of you might have seen, the statistics on AI adoption are staggering. You take probably the most popular one, ChatGPT alone, it's over 100 million users in the first 2 months. I believe that every couple of hours they add an extra 1 million users. It's the fastest growth of any consumer app in history. Microsoft recently published some research that shows 3/4 of knowledge workers, people that work at a desk, already use generative AI at their work. Deloitte found that 2/3 of people that work with computers in the UK are using AI in their jobs. But the crucial thing here, as shown in the picture, is often without telling their company. The Guardian recently reported that only 13% of people in the UK that use AI at work admit it to senior staff, and a third of us avoid talking about how we use it at work altogether. So the reality is this: even if your organization thinks that they don't use AI or they're just starting to roll out AI, your workers are almost certainly way ahead of you, and they're doing it quietly, they're doing it without approval, they're doing it without training, and they're doing it without oversight. Shadow AI seems to be the term that's used, and that's already here, and it's inside every company. So that creates both challenges and opportunities, of course. A challenge because, as I've said, unmanaged AI can introduce new risks into our safety critical work, but also a huge opportunity because if we do put the right structure and oversight around AI, it can actually strengthen how we manage risk. And really today I want to focus on that opportunity. And I'm not going to look at abstract problems 5 or 10 years in the future as to what AI might do one day. I'm going to show you as a live demo, so things could obviously go wrong, of 5 ways that I'm currently using AI in process safety. Because for me, and I suspect maybe for all of you, the priority has to be safety first and AI second. And that's really the message that I want to repeat today again and again. So I've got another few things that I'd like to go through before I jump into those live demos. So I've said that the potential of using artificial intelligence is huge, and it is huge in process safety. But there's already warning signs about its misuse. And these aren't like hypothetical things that people might do. These are actually things that have been noted in industry. And there's a few studies that have just been done. One took the 3 most popular AI tools, ChatGPT, Copilot, and Gemini, and it got them to work on real process safety questions. Researchers asked them things about safety critical procedures, regulations, hazard identification, and the result was that all 3 tools overall performed really well, and they gave answers that looked incredibly authoritative, but they did contain technical errors and fabrications. And in one case there was regulation cited that didn't exist. There was conclusions that would have fallen short of regulation, and the conclusion of this study was that these tools are not reliable repositories of process safety knowledge, and they do pose a risk to the less experienced engineers. Now, there's so much work that can then be done with tools like that to make them more robust, make them more reliable, minimize the risk that they get things wrong. But that takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of experience to understand that this AI tool that's been put together that performs well but could perform much better. So that's an incredibly alarming finding, that a system that performs very well still has huge flaws. There was a second body of work that was done looking about AI versus IA, and so they call it intelligence augmentation. It's a fancy way of saying AI and people working together. And their point was simple: AI use on its own, very risky, but AI combined with experienced human judgment is far safer. And that's why, because obviously AI is looking at historical data, things in the past, but we know that process industries, major accidents have got unique ways of happening, and there's new feedstocks, new assets, new risks with assets pushed beyond their design life. So these are exactly where accidents happen and exactly the places where AI is actually at its weakest. So what the authors found is that in a similar experiment, but done with human oversight, the overall performance was far better. So for me, the huge takeaway there is that even an excellent system used in process safety, and an AI system should never be used without human oversight. There was a third study, and this was highly interesting to me, and it talked about human and AI conflict. What happens when an AI tool recommends something that you disagree with? Well, what this found was that conflict itself became a risk. That caused hesitation for people to take action. It caused, therefore, delays in responses. It caused sometimes rejection of the AI model itself, which then undermined the entire systems. And there was vulnerabilities created by these conflicts. So for me, it's not just about whether AI is right or whether AI is wrong. It's about whether your team can act decisively, even when it doesn't quite agree with the AI. And there was one final body of work that I think is really important to discuss here. And some researchers actually try to treat AI just like any other safety critical element, any other safety system, and they try to quantify the failure probabilities of it. And what they found is they combined human error probability with AI error rates, and they built a model on AI human collaboration. And what they found was quite sobering. You can never treat AI as perfect, and you can't always treat it as always better than people. Instead, what they concluded is you've got to build it into your safety system as just another component, a component with a chance of failure, with its own limitations, and with the need for redundancy, and of course guardrails. So for me, the picture is clear, hugely promising with AI, but it's also massively got its pitfalls. We've already seen evidence in our industry of confident mistakes, invented facts, black box reasoning, and conflicts with human operators. And that's why in this webinar, I want us to keep coming back to that same single principle. AI has got to support safety, not undermine it. AI first and, safety first, and AI second. Now, there's just one thing I want to touch on before I go into these live examples, and that's the ever-evolving position of the UK regulator. And indeed regulators a little bit further afield. So they've started to talk more openly about AI, and their message is clear. None of the rules have changed. The regulations haven't changed. They don't treat AI as something outside the system. As far as they view it, it's another workplace risk, and it's something that has to be managed under the Health and Safety at Work Act, safety case regs, COMA regs, all that sort of thing. And just to quote them from a recent publication, existing health and safety law already applies to AI. That means employers still need to carry out risk assessments, put controls in place, and manage any new hazards introduced by AI. And so they expect, and this is on their website and in some recent conference events that they've done, they expect all duty holders, all operators to carry out a documented risk assessment for any AI applications that they use that touch safety. Consider their reliability, cybersecurity, data integrity, explainability. We'll get to that in a second. Build in accountability and governance. The duty holder still owns the risk, not the AI itself, not the AI software provider, the duty holder. And their message seems to be that the HSE is pro-innovation, provided you can demonstrate it's being done safely and being done transparently. And for those of us in major hazard industries, the message is even sharper. AI must be treated like any other element of the safety management system. I'm just reading from their site. And that means that showing in your safety case, COMA case, alert demonstration that you've thought about failure modes like the model drift, black box reasoning, decision conflict, and cybersecurity compromise. And just to close this out, final quote from the regulator, the HSE aims for AI-related risks to eventually be treated like any other workplace risk, integrated into standard risk management practices rather than being seen as novel or exceptional. And I think that last part's really important. I think a lot of people would still class this as novel or exceptional. We're experimenting with this, we're working with this company with that. But the regulator's view, and something I agree with, is we'll eventually get to the point when it's just any other workplace risk. And in short, well, it seems anyway that they're not going to write a new set of rules for AI. For me to summarize, what I think they mean is use AI if you want, but prove it's safe, prove it's controlled, and remember that the responsibility sits with you. And the last bit is the EU AI Act. I spent far too long making that graphic, so I hope everyone appreciates the effort gone in there. What does the EU AI Act mean for process safety, and why should we care, given that we're not in the EU anymore? You might remember. The reason it's worth looking at is obviously we're adjacent to the EU, but I think it sort of paves the way of what the future direction of regulation might be. And really, at its core, this act takes a risk-based approach, nothing that really anybody who works in the UK isn't used to. If you've got a minimal risk system, like, I don't know, an AI that writes Facebook posts, there's very few obligations placed on you. But if you've got a high-risk system, and that includes anything, I think they say that can impact human life, so anything safety critical, anything in that domain, you're subject to incredibly strict requirements. And I've gone through this, and I've really, it doesn't say these words, but I've really interpreted this as the typical plan, do, check, act cycle. Plan, identify what you're using it for, what the foreseeable risks are, what are the safeguards, and then the do, obviously build in those controls. What governance do you have? How are humans overseeing this, and what are the procedures that need to be followed? We're all probably a bit not quite as good on the check and act side. So by check, they mean the entire system should be auditable and explainable. There should be clear technical documentation. There should be logs of every time it's used, and something that auditors can expect, and you should be having it inspected. And finally, act, you've got to demonstrate that continuous improvement, that you're monitoring, reporting serious incidents, you're taking corrective action when things go wrong. And there's a couple of things just to say there. It's, audit might mean different things to different people, certainly one of the least sexy words in the English language, but they don't mean just look back later at your AI tool. It means you've got to keep an active record, keep active logs, and you have to be able to at any time demonstrate this limitations and its intended use. There are different obligations depending who you are, whether you're the software provider, whether you're the operator, etc. But these people carry the heaviest burden of all of us. You've got to show that your staff that use it are trained, and you've got to be able to suspend it if it misbehaves. So there's a lot there. I think the last one as well about transparency obligations. There's this term black box AI. So even the most perfectly performing system, if it's not transparent, if it's not auditable, if it's not traceable, then certainly as far as I understand, it doesn't comply with things like the EU AI Act. And anyone who's using it must be told that they're using a system that's AI. So this does not apply in the UK. But for me, it does show the direction that the regulators might be heading in. And you could argue that the HSE's position being that AI should just form part of your safety management system, well, then a lot of the principles, Plan, Do, Check, Act, etc., already do apply. So it's a little bit of a clouded view on exactly what the UK regulator expects specifically. But for me, I'm just aiming for something like the EU AI Act. And I think that was all I wanted to say on that. And just to say, that's the philosophy that certainly with any tools that I'm working on, that we've adopted. Everything that I've certainly been working on, hopefully to the expectations of the EU AI Act, is auditable. We can test every individual step, we can challenge every result, and we can monitor and improve. So with that, let's have a look at some live examples. So there's a lot of people on the call, and I'm doing this live. So what can possibly go wrong? So the first Copilot that we use, I actually was just using this morning with a customer. We have preparation for something like a HSE inspection. So if you don't work offshore in the UK, please don't think this doesn't apply to you, because it's the exact same principles that we are applying that could be applied to any regulator. So each year, the HSE inspector in their role go offshore, I think about 150 times, and they can look at anything when they're there, from maintenance backlog to marine procedures, from your lifeboats to fire and gas. And the problem today is simple. Nobody knows everything. I've talked about the skills challenges that we're facing. I believe over 55s are going to make up less than 10% of the workforce of the next couple of years. So definitely experienced heads is becoming, or lack of experienced heads is certainly becoming a growing issue. And what even the most experienced teams can sometimes find themselves caught out, not because they're unsafe sometimes, but just because they don't have all the information when they need it. And preparing for HSE inspection, as I have done many times in my life, often relies hurriedly piecing together things at the last minute to be able to demonstrate that everything is where it should be. And that's not really a sustainable way to assure safety. And it is worth pointing out that we're not very good at them either. Around 25 to 30%, it fluctuates a little bit each year, of HSE inspections continue to show that performance is substantially below the standards expected by the regulations. And that figure has stagnated for years, so we're not really getting any better. And the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle says that you should be, that's the cycle of continuous improvement. So we're not, so clearly we need to do something new to move the needle. So let me bring my first window across. Here we go. Hopefully everyone can see that. So what we've done here is we've put an inspection, one agenda item into here. We've gone with something quite niche. This was something that someone sent me a while ago. And essentially I've taken that extract from their agenda. So you'd see, well, the HSE's coming to look at something, and I'm just going to press run. This is only a demo, so it's quite unsophisticated, but if I was to show you what's happening behind the scenes, I talk about, we talk about the EU AI Act. This isn't lines and lines of code and things that someone like myself wouldn't really understand. What we see here is this is our co-pilots, like under the hood, where you can see that we've got individual steps here. Everything in purple is the AI doing something, and all the black lines are outputs being stitched together. So you can see that even this demo is multi-stage. There's 5 very distinct pieces of AI work being done, but I can individually test and see the output and audit each phase. And hopefully that's enough padding that I can come back. No, it's not. So I'll just keep going for a second. So what's this one doing? Well, it's looking up all of the industry guidance. It's looking up all of the regulations and approved code of practice. It's looking up HSE offshore inspection guides. It's then doing a deeper dive into a library that we have from Freedom of Information requested inspection letters. And then at the very end, it's preparing a summary that is given to the team. And thankfully, we're back now. Let me just zoom in a bit. So you'll see here that what's this done. And to be clear, this might look and feel like it's something that ChatGPT would do, but every single word that's written in this response, I can tell you exactly where that came from. And in the full version, there's a bibliography where we can see exactly where we've taken all of this information from. And you'll see here, so I've reviewed all these findings, etc., etc. And here's what the regulations require. Here's what good practice is on this particular issue. And here are example failures from HSE letters. And what I've done here is this is just a demo, so I've made a short 7 open question audit that you can take offshore, or you can give to the people offshore, or whenever this is being managed, and make sure that you can answer this question, and it tells you what good looks like, so you can assess your readiness. And this particular example I've shown, it was just a demo that I did. I've done quite a few of these, but this was one where this operator subsequently did get some enforcement from the regulator, and their feedback, if I remember correctly, they said that quite a lot of the enforcement would have been caught had they done this. So there's one example of this is AI. It's AI not let loose. It's AI used in a completely auditable and traceable way. All the prompts have been written by safety experts, and we can reference every single place that we got information from. And it's maybe worth saying that there's another sort of way of doing that too. I'll just say this works in a very similar way, but instead of it being point and shoot, a start and stop. This is more of a chat interface that perhaps people are more used to. Works in the exact same way. It only gets information from sources that will be verified with carefully curated information. And really, this is really the direction that I think the HSE and the EU AI Act want people to go in, is that you're using these tools, you're getting value, but you're able to show exactly where the information is coming from. And as you've seen on that previous screen that I was on, it's not a black box behind the scenes. You can actually see what's going on. And if I just scroll up a second, you'll see here that there's an example. This is a very simple one. It only looks through a selection of HSE inspection findings, but you'll see here that these little dates here have obviously removed all company names, but this is telling me the specific letters where this came from, so I can go and have a look for myself. Because as I've said before, as the engineer, it's still my responsibility. So that's the first demo there. We'll go on to the second one about quality checking risk assessment. And this chart here I've taken from an OUK document where there's a term, again, it's an offshore, called SECI, Safety and Environmental Critical Element, but this could be any safety critical piece of equipment. And really, if that fails and you want to continue to operate for a set period of time, you need to do a risk assessment and show what you're going to do to manage the risk in the meantime. But because your equipment's degraded, it's unlikely that you're going to replace it like for like in a short period of time. So you might rely on controls further down the hierarchy of controls, i.e. the actions of people. So what you find here is, for a temporary period, the risk is slightly elevated than it is for normal operation. And that sounds easy enough, but the typical workflow is that an assessment's identified within a very short period of time. Hopefully that's assessed by the right people and controls are put in place, and that needs signed off by management. And then work is done as quickly as practicable to have that repaired. That's the typical workflow, and that seems to go okay. However, this is probably one of the issues that the regulator takes issue with the most. It's certainly one of the highest areas with findings, and the HSE find loads of things, dozens each year. Examples being ORAs that were only supposed to be open for a short period, say 30 days, are still open after 1 year. Risks not reassessed when ORAs are revalidated if you get to the end and it's not fixed yet. Temporary controls that are put in place that brings risk down, not actually being implemented over time, or multiple ORAs, multiple impairments in place, but the cumulative risk is not being managed. And these aren't isolated examples. This is typical. As I've said, this is one of the topics with the most findings. So for me, again, this is another area where the information from the regulator has shown that we're not really improving the situation. And with that bathtub curve of risk, we're actually opening ourselves up to more risk. So what can we do about these things? The quality of risk assessment seems to depend heavily on the experience of the people who are there. So if I do my next one, hopefully everything works fine here. So if I was to take, this is a completely fake risk assessment, but what would typically happen is the team would sit down and they would make a risk assessment, and you can see this is quite a big document there. And if I show our Copilot, let me just upload that while I'm talking. And I'll run that Copilot. So I don't think it's right for the AI to review or approve or sign off on anything. We've just obviously discussed all of that ourselves. But what it can do is it can do a quality check before it's sent for review. So there's loads of sources of what good looks like. There's the regulations, there's the standards, there's the guidance, there's company governance. As I've said, there's things like HSE inspection findings. So what our Copilot does in this situation is it compares that ORA against likely the thick end of 100 different criteria, just to make sure, and simply asks, is this ready to be sent for review? And you'll see here it says, no, it's not. And that's a reference to the fake company governance document. This is just a demo. But here we go. It says that, there's 8 things that you need to do for this document to be ready to be sent for review. And to be very clear, it's to be sent for review. I would certainly never propose, and I don't think that would comply with the regulations, to go against or to take away that management review. But you'll see here that the team clearly have actionable steps that they can take to make sure that this comes back saying that it is ready for review. Why is this important? Well, I think it achieves quite a few things. It means that the quality of risk assessment goes up. It likely means that the time taken for management approval will come down because there might be less back and forth. So like this period here is short, and obviously that higher risk assessment means hopefully that this line comes much further down. And equally, the competence of the team will continue to rise each time it's used, like those apps. Grammarly, that little irritating pop-up that tells you that you've written a sentence in passive voice or used a colon instead of a semicolon. Over time, you start to remember these things, and then your standard of writing goes up. This is the exact same. If it gives you gentle nudges on what to add next time, then hopefully you would get to the point that you regularly submit something to be looked at by this tool, and it doesn't really find very much. So that's another example there, and exactly in the same way as before, that's all traceable. But there are dangers. If this tool's misused, if it gets treated as an approver of ORAs, for me, that's a serious mistake. And AI cannot, should not, and should never approve a risk assessment. As we've said before, that responsibility lies squarely with the duty holder and their competent staff. So if organisations start to blur that line, I think they risk normalising the very issue that the HSE have been finding for years: overdue ORAs, weak justifications, and unimplemented controls. And yeah, so if used correctly, tools like this can strengthen your risk assessment and assurance, but used incorrectly can, of course, undermine it. And that's why I always come back to that same principle: safety first, AI second. So the third one, I'll see how we're doing for time if we do them all. So here's another example of quality checking a risk assessment, this time something very different. So a problem today: bow tie diagrams are incredibly powerful. Full disclosure, I also sell bow tie software. It's a great way, regardless what tool that you use, for visualizing, understanding, communicating risk, for training people. And you can see the exact role that barriers play in preventing major events. But like anything powerful, there are rules, and the knot of the bow tie, the hazard, and top event. So the top event is the point at which you've lost control of the hazard. If that's framed poorly, the whole bow tie can lose its meaning. And unfortunately, that's where most people struggle. And I know this because there's over 70 companies use our software, and they tell us that that's a huge issue, and we spend a lot of time training them. And the feedback that we hear the most is, well, I get the principles from your training, that's great, thank you, but applying them to my complex example is quite hard. So it's one thing to draw a neat bow tie in training, but another to apply it, say something like an offshore platform, or a refinery, or chemical plant. So traditionally, yep, you'd have further training, read some guidance, get external consultants like myself in to check quality, but that can be quite slow and expensive. So how are we applying it? So let's hopefully that this one works. Excuse me. So here we go. Here is a bow tie that is of a car, people losing control of the car. So what we've done is we've taken all of our team's knowledge, we've taken all the good practice that we can find, all of common pitfalls, all findings from the regulator, and we've rolled that up into a little tool here. So I'll just press improve your bow tie, generate report. And what this is doing, it looks at the bow tie against all those published rules and our own knowledge base, and it generates a succinct report that's focused on the user, highlighting what to do. And we've obviously how AI delivers feedback, that's a whole other topic for discussion. But if a bow tie was very poor, it's not really worth looking at some of the finer points, where equally if the bow tie's excellent, you don't want the feedback to come across as nitpicking, or look at something that's not going to add very much value. So how to deliver feedback is hugely important. So what this tool does is, you'll see here, let me just pop out so I can zoom in onto the answer, but you'll see that this delivers a really small report. It's only a page and a half, and you'll see here there's an overall conclusion there. And what we've tried to do is, there's just as an example with a bow tie, if you really get the name of the hazard, its controlled state, what it's currently doing, if you get that right, it's really easy to then get a top event to find the loss of control, and then the rest of the bow tie should hopefully be easier to do. So for example, we've tried to tell them to be a bit more specific, from driving a car to car operating under driving conditions. So This will hopefully work because it makes bow tie adoption easier, because that's a huge thing that we find with like new users, and it gives everyone a virtual expert in the room. But most importantly, it's consistent. The same rules are being applied the same way every time. However, if this was treated as the approver of a bow tie, using it to like build your bow ties, you'll miss the point. That's just AI doing your risk assessment, and it's not going to raise the competence or quality of the people in the room. And as well, the responsibility for risk assessment sits with the team. So that's that one. And I think we'll just do one more. So hydrocarbon releases, we talked about that instant at the beginning, of an uncontrolled flammable gas cloud. Well, in the UK, those numbers have stagnated. We haven't really shown, I think, in any way a demonstrable improvement in that area. So every year, the HSE publish this lovely chart, and for any when this has got the number of releases each year, and the different coloured bars represent the different categorisation of release, from minor in blue to major in purple. And for any statistician in the room, you'd probably say that there's not really a meaningful trend there. That looks like it's stagnating, and there's fewer assets out there, so the number of releases per asset, if anything, is starting to creep up. Certainly not going in the direction that we would want. So it's hard to learn more from this. So what sits behind every single one of these is something called a reporting of oil and gas incident form, or a ROGI form. And that's a huge form, and it's got a goldmine of detail: the causes, equipment types, detection methods. But the catch is that there's so many of them. They're very big, they're not structured, they're not consistent, and they're not easy to search. So this is what the data set behind that chart looks like. That's available on the HSE's website. Every row is a release, and I think it goes on to column ET. So there's absolutely huge amounts of data in there, but it's too much for any one person to go through. So what we did was we took those thousands and thousands of data points. We built a model that extracted the key information. Our safety engineers verified this. They took samples to make sure that the model was getting it correct. They spot checked results once we were finished. It was incredibly difficult. There was so many inconsistencies that we had to resolve, and then we partnered with the OEUK to make this into an interactive online chat tool. So if I was to come here, I can ask a question here. So what this is doing, this is available for free on the OUK website. So anyone, if you just search OUK HCR assistant, what you'll find here is that there's always another question when you see a chart like that. So like now you can ask questions about how all these releases are detected, and you can plot charts, and you can get meaningful output from the data. Like, what's the most common detection method? How are human factors involved? What type of equipment fails the most during startup? So that messy, unstructured data from that Excel now turns into structured learning. And it means that you can go and interrogate the data whenever you want, not wait for a yearly report. What could go wrong if this was misused? Well, if people just assumed that the AI can do it all, get every single classification right, isn't going to spot any other ongoing trends or findings that someone with your experience would, then you might draw false conclusions. Think back to that study. It says AI performs best when it has got a human being, an expert human being working with it. But there's an example. This is hydrocarbon release data, but we've worked with other companies with their own incident data, and that makes that data actionable. You can learn from it. It's not a statistic on a chart or on a Power BI dashboard. It's something that you can actually interact with and learn from. So this is free to use, so there's no excuses not to jump in. I think just for the interest of time, I'll not do the final one, but I'll maybe just quickly talk through it. There's the dreaded 5-yearly re-HAZOP, hazard and operability study, where excited engineers like myself look through P&IDs for days or weeks on end. Incredibly powerful, but my goodness, incredibly time consuming. And think back to the problems I said at the beginning: tight budgets, stretched teams, time poor operators. Can we really commit to re-HAZOPing all of our assets every 5 years? So how's it solved currently? Well, we either don't, or we don't do it every 5 years. We do it, at far lower frequency than that. But the default is, yeah, blanket re-HAZOP of everything, every node, every deviation, all over again, whether anything has changed or not. It's certainly safe, but I wouldn't say it's the best use of everyone's time to manage risk. So, in our consulting, and I know that many others have done this as well, we've started to use the Energy Institute's creeping change hazard guidance to look at the creeping change of each node in HAZOP and see where change has actually occurred. For example, has there been lots of MOCs? Has there been lots of ORAs? Lots of incidents? Lots of releases? You can start to build up a picture for how impacted HAZOP node is. So, yep, we will soon be working with some customers on this, where we'll take an entire HAZOP, all the nodes, all the drawings, all the stuff from the worksheets, all the actions, and then we'll take all the companies, management of changes, ORAs, changes in alarms or deferrals, findings from the regulator, and so on and so on. And essentially, we'll build a model that assigns a probability score, to each HAZOP node as to whether it has been, whether it's a high impact node, as it's had lots of change or an increase in risk profile, or a low impact node. And the idea being that we can at least prioritize the nodes. So if a company doesn't have the ability to re-HAZOP everything, they can at least do it in order of risk rather than starting at node number 1. And that applies the exact same principles as the Energy Institute guidance, but applies them systematically and at a huge scale. Obviously, it could go wrong if you're relying on AI to do your HAZOPs for you. If you're using this as an excuse to not re-HAZOP, certainly missing the point. That a tool like that shouldn't be saying, do this or don't do this. It's more saying, focus here first. And the benefit is that, yeah, re-HAZOPing can hopefully be a less painful, less resource heavy exercise, and something that's more targeted and more risk based. So I'll just do the final few things to wrap up. So if you've seen all of that, heeded the warnings at the beginning, understand the regulator's position, maybe those examples have made you think of some things that you could implement, what do you do? Well, I've looked at lots of bodies of work around the best way to implement AI, and I'd certainly say that start small would be the sort of main outcome. The main finding that I'd say. Certainly, you want to define all your objectives. Are all stakeholders aligned? People are often the problem with AI. So does everyone have the same expectations as to what's going to happen, what it's going to be used for, how long it's going to take? Are leadership bought in? Are IT bought in? Are the technical teams bought in? You can't build on shaky ground, so check your infrastructure, your data environment. Does everyone understand AI? Do they need trained and things like that before you dive in? The next is your data. The AI is only as good as the data that it receives. So is it clean? Is it labeled? Does it have the right context? And you really can turn decades of knowledge into a usable resource if you focus on the right things. Got to choose the right tech. Not every model suits every case. Not every provider suits every case. So pick based on evidence, accuracy, transparency. Don't just follow the marketing hype. And there seems to be a new press release from big tech every day right now. Certainly secure your data. Treat it just like any other safety critical system. Encrypt, restrict, audit, prototype. So absolutely start small, fail safely, learn quickly before you scale. Going away for a long time and making something, and then on day one finding out there's problems is not the way to do it. Any co-pilots that we work on, it's with our customer. We fail as quickly as possible so we can improve the tool. Build continuous improvement right in. It's not static. Safety is not static. It must be updated, must be retrained, must be refined as your operations evolve, as regulations evolve, as your understanding evolves, and as your people, as your workforce evolve. And finally, strengthen the governance. When is it advisory? When is it need overridden by humans? Who owns the decisions? How are you going to audit the outputs? If your organization has an assurance department, has an assurance process, is any AI systems that you use part of that? So I'd say that the biggest lesson I've taken from every pilot we've ever run is most failures don't come from the tech. It comes from how that tech is adopted. So I'd say follow a structured but people first roadmap for when you're rolling out these things, because if we skip any of these steps, this can actually become a new source of risk. So I've taken you through 4 of the 5 examples of how I think AI can make a difference to process safety, preparing for inspection, strengthening ORAs, prioritising HAZOPs. And yeah, things like this aren't future dreams. We'll improve them. Other companies are doing the exact same, but these are things that are happening right now. And just remember some of the statistics that I said at the beginning. We know that up to 30% of HSE inspections still fall substantially below the regulations. We know that there are topics such as ORAs that regularly show up in enforcement. And we know that when AI is misapplied, whether that's overtrusted, under-tested, or treated as an approver instead of an assistant, it has the potential to amplify risk. But we know that we're all using it, whether we say that we do or not, depending which survey that you look at, it might be 2/3, might be 3/4 of people are using it in some degree at their work, and just over 10% actually openly talk about it. 1/3 of people use AI at work and don't tell anyone. So it's already here. So what are you going to do about it? And that's why I think we need our adoption roadmap. We've got a white paper that we'll be publishing shortly, and that expands on these eight steps for how to adopt AI. But that start with clear objectives, prepare your data, test in safe environments, continuously improve, and put in strong governance. And really just to wrap up, the message is simple. AI is not and will never be a silver bullet, but if we apply it carefully, with transparency, with testing, with proper human oversight, we absolutely can reduce risk, and we can make our competent people even stronger. I would describe myself as skeptically optimistic about AI. Skeptical because we can never hand responsibility over to a black box. But I am optimistic because if we get this right, I really think we can achieve something extraordinary. Fewer major accidents, safer operations, and more people going home at the end of a day. Because really, and like this whole webinar, and for me, AI and process safety, it's not about the technology, it's about the people. It's about our 16-year-old apprentices who deserve to come home safe. It's about our grandparents that should still be telling stories right now to their grandchildren instead of being this story. And that for me really is why the order matters so much. It really is safety first, AI second. And my closing statement, my challenge to you is this, look at where AI can strengthen your safety practices today, but then be equally honest about how it could weaken them if it was misused. And that balance for me is where the future of safe use of AI is going to be won or lost. So thank you very much. What I'll do is I'll have a quick look at the Q&A, and I'll go through any questions that have come out. So if you do have any questions, please put them either in the chat or into the Q&A, and I'll just read them out just now. Just give me 1 second just to go through them. And yeah, so there's a few people there. So yeah, one of my colleagues has shared the link to the OUK system there, and someone else, thanks very much, has shared the link to one of the HSE AI pages on their website that shows their position on AI. So that's excellent. Thank you very much for those of you that did that. So there don't appear to be any questions, which is excellent. I'll just make sure I'm looking at the right window. If anyone does have any questions, now would be the time, but it doesn't look like there are any. Some people saying thank you. That's excellent. Okay, well, if there aren't, oh, there's a few coming through right now, so I'll just read them. So let me just go through that. Yeah, so the first thing here that someone's asked, and this is about data security, a huge issue, asks if I upload a HAZOP sheet to Copilot, that means that Microsoft now knows all confidential hazardous risks. So I'd like to answer that in two parts. I believe that this is a problem that's going to go away, but it's a problem that exists right now. I think that a lot of open source models that eventually will all host ourselves, they seem to be about 18 months behind the current state of the art. So I think eventually we'll all have our own large language models that run locally, and therefore you're not really uploading your data anywhere. It like all stays within your company's data moat. But right now that's not the case for a lot of people. So it does vary with each provider. It does vary with the different subscriptions and different levels of access that are available. Certainly, I don't use Microsoft Copilot that heavily, but my understanding is that no, or certainly not by default, but you can have it in such a way that like no, your data remains yours. Microsoft don't have access to it. They cannot use it to improve their models. If you upload things directly to ChatGPT, for example, that's not the case. But their provider, OpenAI, they've got an API behind the scenes, and certainly if you use that, then yes, all your data remains encrypted and it's yours and can't be trained. So the answer to that question is really check with the provider that you're using. And that's one of the things I said in the roadmap about getting the right tech and the right thing that's right for you. I do think eventually we'll use our own model, so that problem will go away. So I think that is the only question. So that's great. I'll leave that there. If anyone does have any questions afterwards, by all means, please get in touch. And if you follow me on LinkedIn or follow the company, you'll see our white paper being launched quite soon. So thank you very much. I'll end it there, and I'll hopefully see you all at a future event. Thanks.